Hello, everyone. Welcome as people start to enter the room. Welcome to today's webinar. We will just give a few minutes for people to join. But before we introduce today's session and the speakers, we have got a link for you to join us. We've got it in the chat as well. If we could have the slide up, thank you. If you go to menti.com and input the code 21107465, we've got a couple of questions for the people who are joining the webinar today to get us started and get us thinking about this topic. So the subject of today's webinar is keeping regenerative real, embracing organics' regenerative roots, and weeding out greenwash. We've got three excellent speakers who I will be introducing you to in a moment. And in this webinar, we've got a few key things that we really like to go through. So we will be talking about the shared principles that link organic and regenerative. We will look at how to identify and challenge greenwash in agriculture. And we'll also explore how collaboration can strengthen truly regenerative systems. But before all that, the housekeeping rules. So if we could have the next slide, please. We are expecting a high number of attendees on this webinar. So here are some of the house rules. The webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube after. So if you've got colleagues or other people that might be interested, they can watch it afterwards. We've got the option for a Q&A. In fact, there'll be hopefully 20 minutes of question and answer with the audience at the towards the end of the session. And you can see there's a special Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please use that to post your questions. And you can also upvote questions that you wish to hear answered by the panels. Please keep your questions clear and concise, though, because we are expecting quite a few, and it helps us to give more targeted and accurate answers if they are clear. Closed captions are available. You can switch them on if you need visual or hearing assistance. That option is at the bottom next to the Q&A button. And of course, it's really important that we keep things respectful and constructive. We're all here to learn from each other. And it's really important that it's a space where people can explore and share ideas. And also to note that the views and opinions shared by the speakers are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of ifoam-Organics International. Next slide, please. Okay, so our speakers. We've got Paul Holmbeck from Holmbeck Eco Consult, and he is a member of the ifoam-Organics International World Board. We have got Andrew Smith, who's Chief Scientific Officer at the Rodale Institute in the United States. And we have Reginaldo Haslett-Marroquin, who's founder of the Regenerative Agriculture Alliance. And then I am your moderator today. I am on the World Board along with Paul Holmbeck. And my day job is as Standards Innovation Director for the Soil Association in the UK. Okay, next slide, please. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the shape of this session, we're going to hear from each of our three excellent panelists for about 10 minutes each. Then we'll have a short discussion between the three of them, exploring some of the ideas that they bring to the table. And then we'll be opening up the chat to you. So do keep putting your questions in the Q&A box, and please put them in there rather than the chat so that we can keep a close eye on the questions that you would like to have answered. So back to that Mentimeter. So please scan the QR code or go to menti.com and put in the code. And then if the team at the office could bring up the actual Menti results, we'll have a little look. So there's two questions in this Menti. The first one, we know we've got quite a broad audience here today. So the first question was, do you feel like you understand the relationship between organic and regenerative agriculture? With the three options, yes, no, and a little. Okay, could you bring up the results? Aha, okay, great. So 61% say yes, 32% say a little, and 7% say no. So we've got an audience here who feel that they've got quite a lot of knowledge on this topic, or at least have an opinion about what that relationship should be, which is great and should make for some brilliant questions later in the session. Let's swiftly go on to the next one. So, do you see the rise in regenerative agriculture as a threat or an opportunity for the organic movement? So there's three options here: threat, opportunity, or both. Fascinating. Okay, so by far the most we've got there is both, which personally I'm quite pleased to hear. 30 saying opportunity and 10 saying threat. So I think we are really going to explore some of these aspects in the presentations today. And we're going to be looking at these questions again at the end of the session to see how opinions and attitudes may have shifted. So thank you for completing that Menti poll for now. We will come back to it later. Okay, the final one before we get into the presentations is, can you name a regenerative practice that's common in organic agriculture? Let's see. So we've got cover crops coming out very clearly there. Soil health, crop rotation, composting. A few on no-till. Biodiversity, interesting. Great. That's super interesting. We've got a few different cover crops, crop rotation. Brilliant. Well, please do keep adding your thoughts to that. We'll be able to send that word cloud round later. Fab. Okay. Well, I think let's get stuck right into the presentations then, and we will start with Paul Holmbeck. So Paul, the floor is yours. Once you're unmuted. It wouldn't be a Zoom call without
Yes, I'm so sorry. It took me a moment. Yeah, thanks a lot, Sarah, and thanks to everybody for attending. This is a very exciting topic. I'm going to share what I see in the big regenerative tent, what opportunities and threats there are, and how ifoam-Organics International is responding to both opportunities and inspiration and threats that we see in the regenerative movement today, and is what we call keeping the foxes out of the hen house. As many of you probably know, many of the larger companies in the world, PepsiCo, Nestlé, Danone, General Mills, they're moving into regenerative, and some are communicating quite actively. There's also a number of regenerative organizations, new regenerative certifications. Some of these have a pretty open bar on use of pesticides, interesting. And then we have two major actors, two of the largest producers of pesticides in the world, Syngenta and Bayer, that are regenerative now too. So it's a very big tent. I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. We have everything from extremely inspiring farmers developing new practices and new mindsets to what's total greenwashing. There's also a whole cultural media layer. The film Kiss the Ground has made soil sexy again. And there are movements of organizations teaming up for policy, like here in the United States, this case, Regenerate America, often without mentioning organic. And even my running socks, I opened them up and it said, regenerate me. So it's kind of all over the place. But what I see is that regenerative is really capturing the imagination of many farmers, food companies, retailers, philanthropies, and policymakers. And for me, this is really positive. The aspirational messaging is highly appealing, also to myself. And for farmers, the mindset and the craftsmanship and really focusing on soil health and regenerative practices generally just feels right. And it is right. And thanks to a lot of research on organic farming, among other things, science is also showing that a lot of these, what's known as most commonly as regenerative practices, have impact. So I see some real opportunities to grow our movement. And still, A lot of it is driven by hype. It's a real stampede. It's the new shiny thing. It's also driven by the ease with which corporate actors can call themselves regenerative without really changing anything, kind of continuing the status quo. So the risk, as I see it, is that this more diffuse, or what some call shallow regen agenda, draws farmers, investments, policy, markets, consumers away from the more transformative solutions like organic and agroecology, or what I would call serious regenerative. And for some actors, that's actually a goal in itself. My experience in Africa and the European Union is that many of the same actors that are pushing a regen policy are fighting against agroecology and organic. I see this in the African Union, I see it in individual nations, and in the European Union. Also globally, right now in Brazil, there's efforts to push regenerative as the predominant agricultural system globally, which would be very positive if it was in fact regenerative. But they say at the same time, there's no time to wait for a definition. So this model for farming in the whole world, we can't make a definition of. And pesticides are only mentioned in terms of providing them and optimizing their use. So this first one from 2022, and we've seen this at each COP, it's an effort to align philanthropy, government policy, finance sector, and all actors in the supply chain. And there are developed specific action plans for each of these interests to drive a regenerative agenda. And friends, we really have to be this good. We need that kind of alignment for a truly regenerative agenda. The stakes in the market can also be quite high. Our friends at McKinsey did a report last year on the state of grocery retail. This is for all retailers around the world, saying regenerative agriculture could become the new organic. Introducing regenerative agricultural labels in their assortment as an alternative to organic labels can be a big opportunity for retailers. And what is this big alternative for retailers? FAIR, which represents $90 trillion in assets, they took a look at these so-called regenerative companies, and they found that there's very seldom robust strategies behind their regen claims. In fact, only 8% had a full setup of goals, actions, financing strategy that would legitimize saying that they have regenerative and a regenerative agenda. So it's kind of aspirational language as a cover for business as usual, largely classic greenwashing. Now it's in response to all of this that we're experiencing, that the organic movement gathered and did a broad consultation and developed a statement on regenerative agriculture called Elevating Truly Regenerative Agriculture. And for those who don't know, the global organic vision in ifoam-Organics International is the widespread adoption of truly regenerative organic food and farming systems, grounded in the principles of organic agriculture, health, ecology, fairness, and care. And our very first point of the 4 points in the statement is that regenerative principles are really at the core of organic. A lot of people think we're just a set of standards and a market and some products, but regenerative is, organics is rooted in regenerative thinking, not least our principle of health, about sustaining and enhancing the health of soils, plants, animals, humans, and our planet, but also fairness, equity, and respect in all relationships, our principle of ecology, working with ecological systems and emulating them, and not least our principle of care, which is about protecting the well-being of future generations and mobilizing local and indigenous knowledge and appropriate technologies. This is where we also have our precautionary principle, which is the basis for our no to GMOs and pesticides. Our second point that we want to make to the world of regenerative is that we welcome all serious regenerative actors as natural allies. And we hope that our behavior also reflects this. I think it does. We see them as helping us to be better, to improve, just as our agroecological partners do. And for me, we are one family. Agroecological, organic, and serious regenerative actors. We are together the transformative alternative to current degenerative food systems. We are also alarmed by the widespread misuse of regenerative, and we're going to call out greenwashing. And how does this look? Now, mostly, we spend our days trying to build the alternative, build organic food systems and organic farming. So we don't want to go down a rabbit hole of negativity, even though many in our movement are provoked by many regenerative claims for good reason. But we do need a few direct hits on some major brands doing regen greenwashing, where they are exaggerating their climate and soil benefits through very fluffy aspirational language. You see this where there's continued use of heavy use of major pollutants and fossil fuel-based synthetic fertilizers, et cetera. So we need to highlight, but also enhance the reputational risk and bullshit. And so this means also getting regen greenwashing on the radar of our consumer authorities. And the UK Consumer Authority did say recently that the use of regenerative is highly likely to be misleading because of the many definitions. And we have cases in Denmark where greenwashing lawsuits have been won based on arguments that could be used also for greenwashing. The fourth point is that we want to reaffirm the strengths of organic as a strong platform for regenerative action in farming, in policy, and in the market. We have a unique global infrastructure for trade and supply chains. We have standards, inspection, equivalence agreements. We actually agree on what organics is largely as a guarantee for consumers. And we have a very holistic production with widespread use of regenerative practices. So to our serious regenerative friends, we believe, action on greenwashing, we need your help. We should stand together on this. We hope that you will mark that synthetic pesticides and fossil-based fertilizers have no place in regenerative agriculture. We would also like to see an end to sectarianism in all communications, both the very false beyond organic narratives, but also those that say it's only regenerative if it's organic. I hope we can agree that principles and mindsets can be regenerative, but that brands and products cannot. And that collaboration on holistic outcomes and metrics and subsidies we want ones that reward transformative whole farm approaches, not just single metrics. In the organic movement, we really want to partner with serious regenerative actors, as we do with agroecological partners, to develop organic further. And if we don't want shallow regenerative or misleading regenerative to fill these spaces in policy and market and on farms, we need to get on the offensive. So in the organic movement, we want to create and share more best practice on building local and regional organic markets. So not just focusing on global trade. Regenerative landscapes, the agroecological movement, and some regenerative actors work on a landscape basis. In organics, we work with biodistricts as a commonality. We need to build movements. That's what really drives change. We need to win on organic policy, and we need to support farmers in transition. This is the last couple of points I just want to make, is that for me, some of the best regenerative actors, like some of the best organic actors, they have this focus on farmers that is, walking with them, igniting their interest in the mindset and creating real pathways for them. It's not just standards and rules, and I love this statement from Brendan Haar from New Zealand about we don't play football because we love the rules. And, we don't do organics because we love the rules. So to grow our tent, more of us need to think beyond third-party certified organic. And I think that means three things. More focus on participatory guarantee systems. ifoam and our members pioneered these market pathways for smallholder farmers. We need to accelerate that work. We need to scale many of the organic advisory and peer-to-peer approaches that really invite farmers in and help them develop. And then build on the successful farmer-led models for ownership, collaboration, cooperatives to increase farmer influence. So I hope we can get more focused back on farming, collaboration, mindsets, and regeneration. I think the many actors in the regenerative movement help us with this. Lastly, we need to look at our communication and be inspired by the communication in the regenerative movement. So we communicate more about what organics is yes to, and not just what we say no to. We're about creating more life. So I think we need to communicate with more heart and optimism. I think the Organic Farmers and Growers and Soil Association have done some amazing work here, explaining organic and regenerative. The Regenerative Organic Alliance has the most fantastic slogan, farm like the world depends on it, that it's all about life. And they build on a solid organic platform. This is almost beaten by their new theme of heal the earth, nourish your life, really putting focus on life. And I think finally, be inspired. I hope people know the Swahili term for organic. It's kilimohai, living agriculture. We've always stood for this and we will always stand for this. So let's talk about it. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you very much for a brilliant whistle-stop tour through some of the big themes and the big discussions that we need to be having when it comes to organic and regenerative. Before we move on, I do have a question for you. So, we hear a lot about the broad tents where all serious regenerative actors are really welcome. But there's a real and present risk that the term has been greenwashed in the ways that you have just highlighted. You talked in your presentation about serious and non-serious regenerative actors. How should we all draw the line between those two concepts?
Wow. Well, I think part of it is proportions. What's the proportion of words and hype to action is one thing. They may be talking about transformative food systems or revolution and all this, but if their actions are really just kind of tweaking the system, then it's not real. And then I think the role of farmers is key. I mean, if farmers are central, that's important. If farmers are not central, but are more just used as poster people, then that's a real problem. I look at whether they're willing to talk about corporate power. Are they talking about, who has power and influence and who's rewarded in the system? And I think if they're promoting degenerative practices, so if pesticides and fossil-based, fuel-based fertilizers are core business for them, that's really problematic. And I guess lastly, I would also say, do they articulate a positive view on organics? I find serious regenerative actors see organic farming as delivering on a whole host of regenerative outcomes. And so they also see the organic movement as part of their movement. So if they're attacking organics, this is typically from either organizations allied with pesticide companies who don't like organics for obvious reasons, or sometimes people just get stuck. They get stuck in their theme and they just see anyone else who's doing well or doing something right as a problem because they have the one true way. And I do see this from some regenerative actors as well.
Great, thank you. Great answer, and I'm sure we're going to have more of a discussion on that as we progress. I can see that there's already some great questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, so please keep them coming as we go through. But I don't want to take up any more time speaking because I'd like to hear from Drew Smith. So Drew, please, the floor is yours, and we'd love to hear your insights.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and amazing job, Paul, for starting us off. And I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about keeping regenerative real. So I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Rodale Institute, and I just want to start off by just a little bit of a highlight of something about J.I. Rodale, who was our founder. And he was writing letters back and forth between Eve Balfour and Albert Howard. And in 1947, he founded the Soil and Health Association. That was 1 year after the Soil Association was formed in the UK. But he added health because he was really thinking and talking about how we farm impacts human health. And then we grow food really to maintain our health. That's why we do it. It's not just about growing a lot of something and for profits. Obviously, though, farmers need to make a living. And and you'll see that because I'm going to give a little bit of the perspective from the United States. But I wanted to share this too. I always go to this. This is from Sir Albert Howard in 1946, around the same time that those associations were being started. And he started this with ecological regenerative agriculture is based on recycling organic matter and hence recycling nutrients. It is based on the law of return and on giving nutrients back to the soil, not simply taking nutrition out of it. And the couple points here I'd like to make is one is that, you know, the pioneers in the organic movement, um, we're really talking about agroecology and regenerative agriculture before this term organic um, came about. So we're really thinking about truly regenerative agriculture that Albert Howard was describing as the law of return, or putting back more in than what you take. So he was saying that this is not an extractive agriculture, it's not an exploitive. But that is what agriculture became. And honestly, Sir Albert Howard prognosticated that, because he went on to say, taking without giving is a robbery of the soil and a banditry, a particularly mean form of banditry because it involves robbing of future generations which are not here to defend themselves. And that was 80 years ago, and we are the future generations. And we can see the ramifications of the forms of agriculture that we practiced over the last 80 years. And so, like I said, I'll take a more United States perspective. Um, and here's why. In the United States, the word regenerative is largely being used to say no-till, meaning really complete absence or zero tillage, um, and the use of cover crops. And while we understand that a lot of farmers use the word regenerative because they see that they're doing something better, and we hope that they're starting to move in a direction that will improve soil and health, but it doesn't eliminate all the other things. It doesn't eliminate the use, in this case, of nitrogen fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, which are highly soluble. And what I'm trying to point out in this slide, you can see across the major growing areas in the United States, we have massive loading of especially nitrogen fertilizers into the land. And in some areas, it's actually there's significant health risks. So I'm pointing here to Cedar Rapids, which is where you can see that there's been warnings in this is Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We have a research center in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, right in kind of the heart of the United States and probably one of the largest, most productive farm areas. And we're seeing, higher rates of, I won't even try to say this, but blue baby syndrome. This is basically when there's high levels of nitrates. Babies that are in the fetus are starved from oxygen and can have birth defects due to it. And there's other health risks because of it. And then we look at a similar map. This is a paper that came out in 2025 that shows all cancer risks attributed to agricultural use areas. Some of the highlights of this is that it's based on what this paper showed is a clear pattern in the United States between what crops are being grown, which is equivalent to what chemicals are being used. And since they used cancer as part of the statistical analysis, they're able to show that the all cancer rates that are attributed to agricultural use areas are similar to all cancer rates from smoking. So my point is that while we can't simply look at practices like no-till, and I'm going to get to this because a lot of why we have these high cancer rates and why we have high use of chemicals is to practice what many are calling regenerative practices, which might be no-till and cover cropping. I noticed in that word cloud that we had that no-till just got was small. It wasn't too big, but cover crops were there, and there was probably hundreds of different practices. And so in the United States, we seem to be very singly focused on reducing tillage. And I would say that part of why this word regenerative has become, popular is because of the industry trying to sidestep organic, and they focused on no-till. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the science behind, what we've seen both from Rodale Institute and other areas in the scientific literature about tillage and other practices. And most of this will come from our farming systems trial. This started in 1981 and is still ongoing. It's a randomized replicated trial at our research site in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, on the east coast of the United States. And there's 72 different randomized replicated research plots, and we now have 8 different farming systems represented. The main systems are 2 organic systems. The organic manure is a longer crop rotation. It's an 8-year crop rotation, and it's based on recycling composted livestock manure back to the land as a source of fertility. The organic legume system is a low input system that's only using leguminous cover crops like clover and hairy vetch as sources of fertility and recycling them back to the land. And the conventional synthetic follows the standard practice, the practice that's on about 70 or more percent of the United States. If you look at corn, soybean, wheat, and cotton in the United States, it's large scale conventional synthetic agriculture on most of that land. And then in 2008, we divided all of them into no-till. So we have now, what is that? Trying to do the math, but we have 12, 14 years of looking at the soil and the changes when we put in a no-till system. And then in 2015, we added a diversified system in the conventional that added cover crops as an additional practice. So just to set this off, in our conventional plots, it's continuous no-till. So since 2008, we have not tilled the soil, and we're accomplishing that by genetically modified herbicide tolerant maize and soy genetics. And you can see here the whole list of the chemicals. Because we have glyphosate or Roundup resistant weeds, we've had to add more chemicals. And you can see that as a trend globally, and especially in the United States, that about the last 10 years, there's been an increase in both the amount of herbicides being used and the toxicity levels of herbicides being used. In many cases, so farmers can accomplish this what's so-called regenerative practice of no-till. In the organic system, we're using a cover crop-based no-till where we use a roller crimper and we mechanically terminate the cover crops. But we're still tilling to plant our small grains. We're tilling to plant forages. We're still tilling to plant the cover crops, but our maize and our soybean are no-till. And I don't want to spend too much time on soil health, but this slide will pretty much tell the story if we looked at all soil health indicators across the farming systems. So clearly our manure system, which we consider the most regenerative organic system, always has the highest soil health. And this we're showing soil organic carbon down to 1 meter deep. So every 3 years we take 1 meter deep soil cores. And what you're also seeing is that within all of these systems, there is no difference between the reduced till and the full till system. What I have down along the bottom is STIR, which is the soil tillage intensity rating. So this is an index of how much we till the soil. Or is it inversion tillage? Are we cultivating for weeds? Or are we, if you can look at the conventional, you'll see the score is much lower. So the lower the score, the less soil disturbance. In the conventional, where we're basically the only disturbance is going over the field to spray and to plant. But that is not having a major impact on soil health. Here I'm showing you the percentage of the year that the land is covered by a living plant. And you can see there's a strong relationship between increasing the amount of living cover and soil health. And I'm saying this because what we've seen both in our research and across, all the scientific literature that we look at, it's that adding cover crops, or I'd even ask you to use the word green manures because we're using them as a way to improve the soil, not just to cover the soil. And adding organic inputs, especially carbon-based inputs like compost, are greatly improving the soil more than just simply not tilling it. And here's what's happened across the United States. When we've added herbicide-tolerant, genetically modified crops in 1996, you can see the difference. It's at least a 15-fold or 15 times increase in the amount of glyphosate used. And you can see if you go back to the map and where I pointed to Iowa, just about how much is being used in those areas. And what I also like to highlight is you can see all this is running. This is the Mississippi River. So it's all running into the Gulf of Mexico. And, I'm going to talk a second about health. But you can see that's certainly not fulfilling, if we have our standard of ecology. Um, but what has resulted in is that 70% of all water samples across the United States have glyphosate. This is even precipitation or rain. 80% of Americans have glyphosate in their body when tested, but we find high levels of 2,4-D and now dicamba. And I'm showing this again from the perspective of our farming systems trial. So these are the chemicals that we apply in our conventional no-till plots. And when we single them out in the same study that I showed earlier, we can see that they attribute to very specific cancers. And so my point is that these so-called regenerative practices, especially no-till, are highly correlated with specific cancers. So we can't call something regenerative if it makes us sick. And I'll just show this here, where Sir Albert Howard goes on to say the war in the soils is the result of a conflict between the birthright of humanity, fresh food from fertile soil, and the profits of a section of big business in the shape of the manufacturers of artificial fertilizers and their satellite companies who produce poison sprays to protect crops from pests, who prepare the various remedies for the diseases of livestock and mankind. And I'm showing this because this is really where we are. The word regenerative is being co-opted and being used basically to sell chemicals and for profits, but it isn't a benefit to the farmers. And as I show you in my last slide, this is a 12-year economic and assessment of our farming systems trial. And the highlights here on the left side is when we add organic premiums, we see that the organic systems are much more profitable. But that's not really amazing news. We've seen that everywhere for most studies globally. But what we also show is when we remove the organic premiums, our regenerative manure system or regenerative organic system is still more profitable than the conventional system. And what I think is important about this to highlight is that when we put regenerative organic practices into place, the money goes back to the farmers. It goes back to the farm communities. It goes to farm workers, especially if we put truly regenerative practices in place that respect fairness and the people that are on the ground doing the work. And it doesn't bleed out of those communities. So that's an important component of what we would call truly organic agriculture. So thank you, and I will stop there and pass it on.
Great, thank you very much. A really fascinating presentation, and really great to see some of that data, the cold hard data. So thank you for sharing it. Before we move on, I've got a question for you. So as you rightly identified, the US has been the source of a lot of the debate and controversy around regenerative agriculture. But out of those debates, what do you think, if you can put it down to one, what's the most important role that organic actors can play in keeping regenerative real?
Well, Paul mentioned it a little bit with the PGS system for smallholder farmers. I mean, I have a concern that we're a lot of farmers are dropping their organic certification, maybe because they don't see a marketing benefit from it. And those are probably our smaller, truly regenerative organic farmers. So I'd like to see a mechanism for them to be able to be recognized in some way, especially if the burden of being certified is too heavy. We, you know, we at Rodale have not been in favor of hydroponics. So in the United States Department of Agriculture National Organic Programs, you can use soilless media, and that is something that we have not been in favor of, and at least in the U.S. context, we think should change. And then I'll just say that, one of the reasons that we champion the Regenerative Organic Alliance and Regenerative Organic certification is that we think the standards are weak on social fairness. And so there should be a recognition of social fairness, which Paul outlined as one of the key principles for ifoam. So I'd like to see that strengthened, either in, potentially just within the organic standards. And to be fair, I'd say that the USDA National Organic Program has made some movement towards improving livestock regulation, which was an area that needed to get solidified.
Great, thank you. And I could see where he nodding away when you were talking about social fairness there, Drew. So thank you very much for your presentation, and we will move swiftly on to Regi. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good morning for those in our time zone. I am from Guatemala, and I grew up in what probably is now being called the most regenerative spaces. Beautiful landscapes where we enjoyed multitudes of production of outputs that we used. And it is great to be in this space now, trying to recodify a lot of that ancestral wisdom and knowledge into this new space we're calling regenerative. For me, it's and for the people I work with, regeneration happens at ecosystem levels. It's not a farm or a product function. And Paul and Andrew have already laid out some of these foundations, so I'm gonna be concentrating more on an example on how we have codified this. Regenerative systems are an ancestral indigenous identity. It really is down to that level, the concept of real regeneration. We understand it as a way of living, not as a set of practices on the land. It's a way of living, it's a way of being among all the other things on the planet, being among ourselves, being among multi-generations. It's about relating. It's a way of relating to life as a foundation of our own existence. It's about a way of knowing when to do something, knowing when not to, knowing when we are headed in the right path and when we need to correct course, knowing how to relate to the next 7 generations. Those are the foundational pivots for regenerative ways of thinking. It is a mindset that asks not only, how can we do something? Like corn, soybeans, how can we do them? But if we should do them in the first place. Is the only place where we get to ask that question before we go on and using this amazing technology, scientific knowledge, and ancestral knowledge and wisdom that we have. That wisdom of asking the question is the fundamental principle also of ifoam, of do no harm. So regeneration is a system level outcome. System, a product from a system contributes to regeneration, can do that, yes. A farm can contribute to regeneration, but only within a natural system and within a business ecosystem that respects the processes on the landscape. When exploitation is part of the process in the business side, then all of those things that Andrew was talking about become part of the problem, fairness and so on and so forth. Labeling, claiming, or even certifying must be the last step in the process. It cannot start from that point. Otherwise, we again top-down whitewash our own ability to see the full percentage, this food capacity of this amazing promise. On an ecological level, just to get some critical indicators, water systems, central. Water is life, is sacred. That's fundamentally why. Biodiversity, because all living systems matter and we relate to all of them. It's a life relationship. Carbon, soil health, all of those things are important ecological indicators, not the end game. Plant diversity, crops and native species, for example. From an economical perspective, full cost accounting. There's nothing external. End of story. We got to understand that. Wealth and equal access and distribution is not about profits. It's about building wealth and ensuring that the code is behind the system so that it is well distributed and accessible to all. Regenerative systems economically prioritize farmers' economy as a non-negotiable system-level bottom line. It's not about the P&L of a farm or an enterprise. It's about the ecosystem, the business. And so socially, we're looking at nutrient integrity or ecological integrity. That's where the idea of nutrient density comes from. Human health, decentralization of design to ensure equal access. Like, I don't want to be shipping products from the East Coast to the West Coast when the West Coast can produce them. It's central that we understand that. That's how we then undo the good things on the land. Reclaiming our collective indigenous identity and building a culture of regeneration. Not an agribusiness culture, but an agri-culture. That is an indigenous identity. Is about the whole mind, body, and spirit connection on the social side of this. Now, our story is this whole story of how we see the world and behave and learn. We exemplified it in our work on poultry. This is not about chickens. This is a blueprint for the recodification of that mindset. So if you look at the chicken now, chicken is a jungle fowl in these trees. It has this massive biological, chemical, and physical impact on all levels of energy transformation. We start harvesting part of that energy as opposed to thinking of products and production. Farming has very little to do with production. Farming is a process of stewarding energy transformation centered, and if it's going to be regenerative, must be centered on the natural biophysical processes of the earth that through geoevolution, we're able to perfect that energy transformation mechanisms. And as a result, as we engage that, we get multiple levels of energy, some of it harvestable right away, some of it not, some of it goes through multiple processes. Bottom line is food. Energy is simply food. When it closes its cycles, we harvest some of it ourselves. Other creatures will harvest the rest of it and turn it back into something we can harvest. But it is at the end a process of energy transformation, and we as farmers, we simply steward the process. We don't produce anything. Nature has done it for billions of years, way before we existed. In the chicken case, here's a picture of the landscape, what it looks like once prepared. Chickens are supposed to be in the open space, outside, free-ranging. From that code, we have designed farms, production units, farms, and as we build those farms, we have learned a lot more about breeds and what to do. And this same blueprint can be used for any livestock, and the blueprint of energy transformation used for anything that we harvest off the land. Basically, chickens back in their natural jungle-like habitat. But it's not just about the chickens. There is energy that then comes out of that process, which we moved into the landscape. So we can feed other crops with that same energy that came out of behind the chicken. That means multitude of produce. We have tested over 200 different other products, especially the perennial crops. And as we do this, we also brought back our indigenous ancestral foods. We took that process and put it right over a cornfield, sorry. And we took this acreage, we first identified with it, meaning became one with it through our indigenous identity. Once we did that, we sketched out what we're gonna do. We mapped it out, identified all of the native species of the space, so we knew what to do and what not to do. what to put there, what wanted to be there, what the tuash were, meaning the families of families that wanted to be there, that evolved with this landscape. Hazelnuts, elderberries, basswood, you name it. It's all part of here, this space. Gather with the people who know how to read a lot of these processes from a science perspective. Ensure that the water was being kept on the land by removing tile, drain tile, and other kinds of barriers that had been put into that living process. Planted perennial native hazelnuts, made sure the farm was covered, built basic infrastructure for the poultry. Whether it was cold or not, we just kept going. This is Minnesota for you in the middle of the winter at 30 below. And yes, in the summer it looks beautiful, but also is highly productive. This year alone, we were able to do a full year of production at this space. Brought back our native foods from Guatemala and other places that we now can grow and feed our families with. It's not always about selling something. That is a colonizer mindset. Corn, all of these different products, and of course, always measuring what's going on. How is is infiltration of water, soil health, organic matter, all of those fundamentals of energy transformation. And then we built a whole system around it, multiple enterprise sectors, nonprofits, and institutions that we needed to support the overall poultry-centered regenerative design. Once we look at a region, then we're looking at a potential regenerative outcomes. And this is our region center out of Stacyville, Iowa. Now we move into governance, where we are bringing all of the different participants in the system into governing structures that resemble our ancestral community-based territorial government systems that used to be what managed the continental US to begin with and Mesoamerica. This diagram represents that ancestral system, and that's what we are bringing back into our governance. As we do this, we can't stop thinking about this mass opportunity in the global regenerative movement that can be built with the existing institutions. ifoam at the top, of course, because it represents a lot of what I just said. World Agroecology Alliance, the Permaculture Association, the Fair Trade Labeling Organization on the fair trade side, codified internationally already how we do this, the Biodynamic Federation, the World Health Organization. I think it should be called the World Food as Medicine Organization, but that's another story. Bottom line is there is many institutions like this already got most of the 700 million farmers on the planet under 60 acres that are producing most of the food we eat anyway. We already got the regenerative movement. We just refuse to work together and reclaim this space as ours instead of just letting it get whitewashed. And of course, now we can move to standards and certifications. Of course, our foundational system allows for participatory guaranteed systems, peer-to-peer certification models, and that's what we'll be pursuing next. We built the foundation, so now we can do certification as opposed to doing certification, hoping to then find farmers who will follow it. So are we really ready to start a real regenerative movement? I say we are probably becoming more ready. We got what we need. Now it's time to use it. So with that, I'll yield back and Mateos, gracias, danke, miigwech.
Great, thank you very much, Reggie. That's really fascinating. So many questions, including from the audience. There's a lot in the Q&A box, which we'll come to shortly. But I've got a question for you first. So you made the very compelling case that regenerative agriculture goes way beyond a set of practices or techniques or outcomes. And it really calls us to rethink our relationship with the earth and the connection between plants, animals and people. So for me, the big question is, how do we start to shift mindsets to bring truly regenerative, organic, agroecological systems to life?
Yeah, thanks for that question. In the last 3 years or so, I've done presentations all around the country and part of the world outside of the US. The one thing that I keep looking for and getting good feedback on is this sense that we are all doomed. This gloom and doom is really taking our youth first. They are struggling to find meaning in life. And so when we start thinking about this space of regeneration, the first two things we must do is indigenize the mind, the body, and the spirit. So we may re-understand our true identity as indigenous creatures, indigenous to the earth, made of her elements. We belong to her. That's who we are. We're not black, brown, agronomists, PhDs, or we are creatures indigenous to the planet, all of us. May not be native to some areas, but we are indigenous. Once we understand that, the sense of hope and belonging opens up the view of the other 95% of possibilities and hope that we block ourselves from when we are just looking at the world as production, colonizing, extraction, money, and so on. And so the second step naturally is decolonization of the mind, the body, and the spirit after we start indigenizing. And that means stop extracting, stop looking at the world as a linear space, especially in agriculture. There's nothing linear about it. It isn't seed, land, output, yield. That's not how agriculture works. Once we see both of those things, the natural transformation of the mind keeps happening and happening. Is not a one, but it's not a thing you inject in your arm and you're done with it. Is you have to work at it, but the work of doing it is in itself so rewarding that it's so totally worth it. I invite everybody to start indigenizing, decolonizing, so that we may one of these days start experiencing the other 95% of possibility, hope, and options and opportunities that are right in front of us.
Well said. Great. Thank you very much. Okay. So we are going to come to questions from the audience soon, but I'd just like to have a moment to ask the panelists if you have questions or reflections from what you've heard from one another. You're bringing, there's quite a lot of similarities and links between what you're sharing. What do you see as some of the key points that really hit home between your presentations? Paul, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, no, I'm very inspired by what Reggie and Drew have said. And I mean, bring together science and spirit. And one of the points Reggie made that I think is particularly important, which I think responds to a couple of the questions that there were, is that regenerative is at the ecosystem level, that products can contribute, that farms can contribute. But in a way, there was a question about, can't you put regenerative on products? And I think it diminishes the understanding of regenerative to do so. I mean, we know how difficult it is to say a product is sustainable. All of the different dimensions and the complexity there. Regenerative is much more difficult. So I think trying to spread the understanding of regenerative at the ecosystem level also brings the three movements together of agroecology, serious regenerative, and organic, because we're working at the landscape level more and more. We are working at the biodistrict level more and more, and that's really a common ground that we can develop and learn from each other on.
Yeah, on my end, I think I really appreciate Andrew's layout of the astronomical, unfathomable cost of conventional ag. And yet we always are asked if regenerative is financially viable. It's almost like it's so insulting, intellectually insulting to even ask the question, because it doesn't matter. We could stop doing everything. It would be cheaper than doing what's going on right now with that massive scale consequence of not only expense, the cost to farmers, communities, the health of consumers, but now the fact that we can't put this genie back in the box. This stuff is out there, is in the rain, is everywhere. Who is going to pay for that? That is the question we'll be asking, not whether it is financially viable to move away from it. That really is so the wrong question now, listening to that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have too much to add. I love both topics that both Paul and Ray pointed on. I think, I wholeheartedly believe with what Reginaldo was saying about, what regenerative agriculture really is. We sometimes get asked this question, and sometimes it's just from a scientific perspective. It's so broad. There's so many different types of agriculture. To study them all can be difficult, which is why to some extent we're studying what is the most common, and even in some cases the organic, what might be allowed, and say this is certified organic to the standards. May even not be completely regenerative, but it's the common practice that we're looking at. So, yeah, I don't know if I have too much more to add to that question, Sarah. So
No, that's great.
move
Thank
on to
you.
questions.
Yeah, and we'll, as I said, we'll come to questions from the audience in a minute, but there's a few different threads that I'm picking up in some of those questions, kind of trying to make a link between where we need to get to in terms of the mindset and the approach and the way we think about these things, and what we've got in front of us in the world now, and what the organic movement has so far brought to the table in terms of things like organic standards and certification. There are quite a lot of people on the webinar today who are certified organic or involved in the organic market. I think you've all at some point said it's not about standards and certification, but I'm really interested to hear a bit more about what you think the role of third-party standards and certification are in driving these changes and bringing this picture.
Well, I could go first because I've been at this with fair trade and organic and everything. And this is something we must understand, is that most of the time the certification is just coming to look at what farmers are doing and then certifying what they do. I have not gotten a single iota of actual support, and not in my case, and not in the case of hundreds and hundreds of farmers that we work with. Most of those farmers are better at regenerative than any standard out there. And so, to the extent that the certification is actually community controlled and managed, as in what we are discussing here, it has a tremendous value, and in fact is probably the most valuable and the more credible way of putting labels. Labels are critical and certifications are critical. But this third party thing really, really messed everything up. Now we got this industry of third party certification. It's almost like the third economy of agriculture, and yet not any of that results in tangible improvements in the livelihoods of the farmers. It does create an industry sector, but it isn't as if we need to have it if we are able to get organized. And this is back to Paul and ifoam and all these institutions. It's like what we haven't done is organize these systems into the actual certification schemes. We must do that because otherwise this gets taken over, keeps getting taken over. And unfortunately, right now, most of the regenerative certification schemes, and I'm not going to name names just to be fair, but they're good ones, but also some that just came in because there is a business opportunity, not because they have any interest in regeneration.
Great, thank you. With either
Yeah,
of you,
I mean, since I'm off mute, I'll just say, yeah, I think it's critically important that we have a third-party certification like the organic. And I wasn't here when it all started, but I can understand, we can kind of see where we are. We have all these different labels for regenerative that all mean something different. And the same thing happened, 50 years ago in organic. There was questions about, well, if you were in California, it was different than if you're in Pennsylvania, and probably if you're in Europe, it was different than if you were in the United States. So it's great that we have an organic label that's backed by federal government, that can be strengthened. So I just want to say that it's necessary to have that third party certification, regardless of what we might think of it currently. I think we need to dig in as a movement, as part of this movement, and make sure that we prop it up and that the certification has integrity.
Sarah, I'm gonna just back up on that because we tend to misunderstand accreditation versus certification and verification. Those are three different things. We need accreditation institutions, and yes, that's what the USDA does. But the USDA does not certify, just to be clear. The certifiers are institutions in the middle Those are the ones we call third-party certifiers. Accreditation institutions is what we need. We need to become the global regenerative accreditation institution so that those doing so-called third-party certification are accountable. That's what I'm saying. Just because we need certification, it's just we get confused in these things because we talk about organic as if it is the accreditation and certification, but those two are separate. And so I'd like us to really bring it to that level of there is accreditation institutions. We need that because we lost too much to the existing. Now, the USDA, is allowing hydroponics and all of those things. There needs to be accountability even at that level, but at least we have that. That's a major, major win. Absolutely. Now comes the certifiers. Those certifiers need more accountability. Right now, they are just, many of them foxes guarding the hen house.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what's been said. I mean, there's no question in my mind that third-party organic certification, so it's the best guarantee that consumers have who are far from farmers, that the product they have is produced in an entirely different way. On the other hand, the institutionalization of standards has resulted in kind of a solidification and a lack of dynamic in those standards. And so what we really need is much more development of our third-party system for global equivalence and so on. And particularly in response to another question, there was fairness that needs to be integrated to a greater degree in our private certifications to ensure that farmers are equally rewarded and have influence in their supply chains and so on. But I think, we need much more than that, because rules and standards are great, but we need inspiration. Farmers need inspiration to further develop their practices together with other farmers and their communities. And, I think what the future points to is that many of these certifiers and organic associations need to take that space where they're supporting farmers, working with farmers in groups to further develop organic farming and have much more dynamic. And there, I think, we have PGS, participatory guarantee systems, which gives access for creating local markets. They don't need to have a labeling for some kind of global trade. They want to create strong local and regional markets. And then those systems can be a basis for even smallholders in the global south, many of whom I work with, can then if they want to, can become grower groups, be certified organic for the global market. I just think we need to think bigger than third-party certified going forward.
Yeah, I've got to be careful not to step out of my moderation role too much, but I think that we've got to remember that third-party certification and standards were part of a toolkit, a toolbox of many things that a movement can offer to try and further principles. And we should take it as a major win that we've managed to get into the market something that prohibits artificial fertilizers and toxic pesticides. I mean, that is kind of amazing given all of the other factors in the economy that values many other things that are not as important for ecological survival, I suppose. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now and turn to the questions. So thank you very much for all the questions we got so far, 47 of them. I'm going to go in the order of the ones with the biggest upvote. So we've got one from Liam O'Driscoll, which is kind of on the same thing as we're talking about now. They say, as an organic farmer, I'm really worried that the organic sector will be pulled into regenerative just to suit the big multinationals to keep using chemical inputs and make consumers think that their produce is chemical free. He thinks organic should keep separate from this term because inspectors are certified and already have customers' trust, which will lose if we go away from that. So it looks more like a comment than a question, but do any of you have any reflections on what Liam's put there?
Just a quick reflection. I mean, I think, yeah, in terms of being separate and being something recognized as organic and organic certification and so on, I think that's really important. I mean, that was the basis here in Denmark for how we got to market shares for organic basic foods, of 30 to 50% for milk and eggs and flour and so on, was this trust in a set of standards that they're inspected, you can count on it. But I think there's so much going on right now with regenerative organic certification. There will be different forms of these things. And I think the best practices one of them will be to build on a solid organic platform and then add additional measures that the national standards haven't kept up with, but we're talking more fairness, more animal welfare, much more focus on soil health. So just kind of developing. We want that as well. So I don't think that's a danger. I think it is a danger if we have organic and regenerative products competing in the market. There's no way in traditional retail that there's space for those two alternatives. It'll be one or the other. And I think some actors have seen that as a way to push organics out of the market. And I think we have to fight that. And the only way to do that is the good offense, working hard to position organics in the market and communicate well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well said, Paul. I'll just build on that and just say that's why we're having this conversation, right? We see the word regenerative and we're concerned that it could go away from organic. I think if anything, by us having this conversation and all the conversations we're having beyond this just today, it's pushing the organic movement to make sure we are truly regenerative. And I'm optimistic that when all the chips fall on the table, it'll be the organic movement that is highly recognized as the strongest standard, and will be the winner in this game.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, and the next most upvoted question is kind of linked to this, and it perhaps reflects something of the particular legislative situation in the states where the organic regulation is at a level that arguably is probably the furthest removed of all the regulations from the organic principles. And I think one of the things that the Regenerative Organic Alliance and Regenerative Organic Certifications try to do is to fill that gap. But I wondered, Drew, if you can respond to the question about why regenerative organic certification seems to be being pushed over and above regulated organic. I guess that's probably more of a question for the states.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, the reality, I mean, just to be clear, one of the reasons that we started the Regenerative Organic Alliance or Regenerative Organic Certification, you must be certified organic. It starts with organic. It isn't a separate label away from organic. It wholly embraces, you have to be organic. And that was a reaction, one, to other labels that are using the word regenerative that are not using the word organic and are completely sidestepping organic, and in many cases are a low bar standard that are pretty easy to entry and still heavy use of chemicals, and like I mentioned in my talk. And the other one, in all honesty, the tipping point was hydroponics when the National Organic Standards Board approved hydroponics in the USDA NOP. And at the same time, there was very weak standards around livestock, and maybe those could even be strengthened. I mean, what we see is we have smaller scale farmers that have been long-time organic farmers doing what we would call regenerative practices, like nearly 100% grass-based grazing of livestock. And then we saw, farms that had 10,000, 20, 40,000, 60,000 cows in a desert without a blade of grass, but being trucked forage, and a lot of times forage on desert land with heavy water use, depleting aquifers, to grow things like alfalfa and forage. And then all of those animals basically being fed on a feedlot, under confined, might be even considered a CAFO. But because the standard said that they were eating forage, it didn't meet the level of the law of what we would think is organic or certainly regenerative. So it just seemed like there needed to be a strengthening of, and the point is that those large scale farms basically destroyed those long-term small scale farms because they couldn't compete on scale. And like Reginaldo was saying, when you can ship things like milk across an entire country, then there's really a competitive disadvantage in this case for farmers that were, practicing what I would call more of a regenerative organic. So those are the things that pushed us towards there. And because the standards really had that also, I say that because when the regenerative organic standards include animal welfare, all of those so-called organic farms suddenly wouldn't be allowed. So that's one of the reasons, and also all of the hydroponically grown crops wouldn't be allowed.
Great, thank you very much for that clarification.
Right.
So I want to move on with some of these other questions, and it feels like there's a section of questions around the kind of other mechanisms that can be used to drive uptake of more regenerative, more organic practices. The first one is around there's a new EU directive called Empowering Consumers for the Green Transition. And could that be used as a way of protecting against the term regen? But I'd like to take liberty by broadening that question to being, I'd like to know all of your views on the role of broader regulation in supporting the transition to more sustainable, regenerative, organic systems. And Paul, perhaps I'll start with you, seeing as you have play such an active role in with policymakers around the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that organics and real regenerative practices are, you can develop the sector, or you can develop among farmers, but it's really interesting what's happening in all the regulation in relation to conventional farmers. And so everything that's happening with subsidies, are subsidies just financing because farmers have some land, or is it because they're actually doing something for climate, for soil, for animal welfare? So those pieces, repurposing of subsidies is absolutely essential. I mean, farmers are like heliotropic, like sunflowers. They follow the sun. You put in, you get the farming you pay for also to some degree. And then, regulation of, what's allowable of pesticides and practices and so on. And are those, in Denmark, we have pesticide fees. A farmer, if you want to use pesticides, and the more toxic it is, the higher the fee. And so you're kind of sending these signals from society that this is not what we want. We're going to tax things that we want less of, and we're going to support things we want more of. And then, other regulation in Europe, a lot of the interesting, not all good things happening in terms of, the greenwashing regulation, the requirement, ESG requirements, and so on. The more pressure that can be put on degenerative practices, the better for organics, the better for regenerative agriculture, no question. Great,
thank you. Now, Reggie, I'd love your perspective on this question as well, because got quite a European-centric view. What are you seeing as well?
Well, here's what I know, and too many people posting things about right now are posting also, don't trust the government. I don't think that is either a good idea, but here is the challenge, and this is where, Paul, you said something about going on the offensive. The key is to understand what does going in the offensive actually means. And this is where this question comes into a more clear view, because going into the offensive for me actually means organizing, and building more grassroots representation, and then moving it up the chain instead of building up on top and then moving it down. Regulations that start from the government are normally not a good idea, because what happens today is that the agribusiness sector is so entrenched, so metastasized within our governments, that it's almost impossible to get good regulation that can lead to regenerative. Now, that's not every country, of course. And Paul, you got examples of that. But here in the US, that's a dead end. every state, every county. I mean, I can't even show up to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture to testify about what we do because I am surrounded by this, really intimidating individuals who are paid to be there to do exactly that and to control the legislation. So we have to ensure that we continue to do that. In insurgency tactics and development, we always said 10% of the energy of the force that is working on this must be concentrated on disrupting, occupying, and expanding the role within that conventional system, yes. But 90% of us must be concentrated on organizing and building the foundation so that then we can bring those regulations, regulatory frameworks, and proposals to governments once we have enough support and as we build enough support so that they are not just whitewashed and discarded and ridiculed. This is where organizing is the next frontier. That's how we go into the offense. It's not by attacking or by exposing or fighting. I mean, that is proven to be not very effective, but rather bringing in the examples. Remember, regulation, just like labels and marketing, normally follows trends, social and otherwise. And in this space that we're talking about, building that kind of futuristic regulation, then we can organize all the way from those folks getting sick by buying products that are either whitewashed, mislabeled, or simply just bad for you, all the way to the farmers. That is by far the most powerful tool we have for building new legislation. And in some countries can go faster. In the US is literally pushing a rock up the hill, but it is still doable. We are still doing it despite those challenges. And then where it can be moving forward faster, it should be supported in the global movement of organizations working on this. I think every leader there must understand that it is their responsibility to start seeing this and working on it.
Wow. Do I agree? And I think, because policy is written by the powers that be. And I think the more you organize in the environmental movement, the farming movement to gain influence, then you can gradually ratchet up and have some policy and regulation that makes sense and so on. But yeah, the starting point is organizing, and it's organizing, helping build strong organizations across the world that are not only positioning organics and agroecology among farmers and in farm communities, working with farmers, strengthening those communities, but also positioning in the market and then in policy as well. And I think that's, ifoam-Organics International and our new strategy, that is our absolute #1 focus, is strengthening organizations' capacity to drive change in policy, in farm communities, and in the market. And I applaud totally what's just been said.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. And actually, that takes us quite nicely onto a question from Stacia Nordin about the situation in Malawi, where they said they've struggled for 50+ years to get organic off the ground as an organized movement. I won't read out the whole question, but do you have any kind of tips and advice for how we really do bring and build this kind of grassroots drive towards the kind of future that we want to see?
Yeah, I think there was a question from India that was almost exactly the same. Yeah, and I mean, in Malawi, I can connect you, Stacia, with some actors. I see from the question you've had trouble getting some traction with the authorities there. I can definitely put you in touch with a real champion of agroecology in the Ministry of Agriculture. But yeah, I think it's about building strong organizations, and there's a lot of positive developments in East Africa and West Africa and some in Southern Africa on developing national strategies for organics and agroecology. New strategies approved now in Tanzania and Kenya. Uganda is very close. 13 nations were just assembled, including Malawi, to share best practice. It was policymakers and organic and agroecological leaders and farmer-led organizations sharing best practice. So I'm more than happy to connect you to that. But yeah, I think it's all about building the capacity within farmer-led frontline organizations to really drive change is absolutely key.
Great, thank you, Paul. I think we've got time for just one question. Oh, Andrew, do you want to come in on that?
Well, I was just going to say, just briefly, there's been some previous research, and we're working on building on redoing some research that was done a decade ago to demonstrate, and then there's also, we could pull from a body of research globally just to demonstrate the economic benefit. And we're mostly doing that research to be able to go to policymakers, like people who are, running governments. In our case, it might be a state, but in your case, it might be the country. So you can clearly, tell them the economic benefits. And a lot of times they aren't clear. The economic benefits as well as the ecological benefits are so overwhelming. I know it's sometimes, like Reggie said, we're pushing a rock up a hill, but sometimes you can break through with that conversation.
Great, thank you very much. I think we're actually pretty much out of time for the questions. However, there's loads we haven't got to, and we don't want the conversation to end here. So please follow our various socials, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, where we will like to continue the conversation with all of you, and we'll put some of these questions, we'll pose these questions to the community and hear back from our speakers today. But can we please go to the Mentimeter, because it'd be really great, and I'd like the three panelists to please stay on, and let's have a look at these results together. So this was a question at the start as well. So do you feel like you understand the relationship between organic and regenerative agriculture? So this was questions to the audience. Let's see. Oh. Just I promise I won't sing whilst we wait for the results to come back up, because that would be disastrous for everyone. But perhaps whilst we wait, do any of you have any final words or any burning points that you would have liked to have made in this webinar that you don't feel we've quite bottomed out yet?
There may be just one thing is there was one question about practices versus outcomes. And I think it's just important that, like, because organic, especially a standard, is very practice-based, right? But I think it gets to this regenerative question because the outcomes are being very much pushed by industry to be about carbon, and it completely ignores biodiversity, water quality, pollution in the air and water. So, if we're going to have a conversation about what the outcomes are, it can't just be, did we add more carbon to the soil? It's got to be a holistic look at the outcomes. But that's not where people want to go. They want to just look at carbon, and I think carbon's still a moving target because it's a carbon cycle, right? So it's not as simple. And I think that the science behind it is not so strong to look at a conventional versus an organic, if we were looking for carbon markets. But anyway, just saw that in there. I thought I'd make a comment.
Good. Thank you. Okay, could we have the last few slides up, please? Okay, so great. So people do feel, and that's bigger than there was at the beginning, which is always a great result if you've been doing a webinar. So well done to our panelists. The next, so I'm going to move us swiftly on because we've only got a minute left. Do you see the rise in regen ag as a threat or an opportunity for the movement? Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that was pretty much a similar balance to before, wasn't it? With perhaps slightly more on the threat front. So yeah, great, thank you. I'm sorry that was so quickly flashed up on your screens. Next slide, please. I think there's some after the thank yous. Great. So we'd love your feedback. Did you like our webinar? Please head to our YouTube page if you want to see our previous discussions, and we'd love to hear from you how you found this today. Next one, please. And yep, thank you for your time. We would love to connect. And as I said, we'd like to continue the discussion. And if you're interested in learning more about ifoam and becoming a member and being part of the organic movement, there's a QR code there to scan to find out more. But that just leaves me to thank our 3 excellent, insightful panelists and to all of you for joining us today. And we hope to see you either over on LinkedIn or some of our other platforms where we can continue the conversation, or at a future webinar. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.